This Christmas, Illumination brings you a film for the entire family.
Here we go. Tail feather torsion.
Check.
Wing deployment.
Check.
Let's fly.
Rainy day is temporary. The sun shining through is just a cloud. The sun shining through is just a cloud.
Migration.
We're not gonna make it, are we?
Uncle Dan!
Hello, you're in the right place. This is my Capstone project. I'm Diana, and I'm a data analyst. As a data analyst, I like to think of my job as telling stories with data in order to provide recommendations on what to do next. I have 3 years of experience as a marketing analyst. Prior to that, I completed my MBA at UCLA focused on marketing. Over the summer of my MBA program, I interned at Paramount Studios on the marketing strategy team. There, I collaborated cross-functionally with all of the marketing teams to lay out the roadmap for upcoming films. Before business school, I worked as a project manager and an intelligence officer in the Air Force for 7 years. While I love data, I consider myself a storyteller at heart. That's why I'm looking for data analyst roles in entertainment and media. For my capstone project with Savvy Coders, I wanted to tackle a movie box office projection using historical data. Specifically, how much money will the Universal Kids movie Migration make when it is released in December of 2023? First, I had to collect some data. I used Kaggle to find my data and primarily relied on one source called Top 1000 Movies of All Time. This spreadsheet, of course, had the top 1000 movies at the box office of all time, along with domestic box office performance and worldwide box office performance. The gross or box office was not adjusted for inflation, however. I decided to focus only on domestic box office as I wanted to limit the scope of my analysis in order to really dig into those numbers. I did, however, also download and rely on one other data set showing the top performing movies of 2023 so far for more recent information to help in my analysis. Next, I had to structure the data in order to work with it. Here, you can see how I changed the string for the gross or domestic box office to actual numbers in Excel. Next, I wanted to fill in the nulls that the spreadsheet had with the median gross using Python. I went with the median instead of the average since there were some outliers in the data. Looking at you, Avengers Endgame. Again, using the gross or the domestic box office, I filled in the nulls with the median gross. I had some issues here in Python, which is why I broke out the code this way. There was a space after the column heading of gross, which caused me some issues in my code. After I fixed that on the spreadsheet, I decided to export my clean top 1000 movies to SQL in order to clean it up a little bit more. Once in SQL, I knew that I was concerned only with animated films, given that Migration is an animated kids film. Next, as previously mentioned, I was concerned about outliers. Outliers are concerned, of course, because they can skew data when analyzing it. So, I took out 10% of the gross outliers that popped up for animated films. I took out the top 5% and the bottom 5% of the animated films according to their gross, leaving me with 143 animated films from the original 1000 movies. This was much easier to handle having cleaned the data. As previously mentioned, I decided to use another data source in addition to the top 1000 films in order to add some timeliness to my analysis. I decided to look at the top 40 performing films in 2023 so far, given that Migration will be released by one of the 4 major film studios, Universal. With Universal's backing, Migration will almost certainly be one of the top 40 performing films of this year. Now, let's get into some visualizations. One of the things I like about Tableau is that you can still manipulate the data for the visualizations, which I totally did. The first thing I noticed about my first chart showing all 143 top animated films is the wide range of domestic box office numbers, or grosses. From the Smurfs movie all the way down at 43 million to Finding Nemo all the way up at 381 million. Note again that this is after I removed the top 5% and the bottom 5% of the animated films. Finding Nemo is not the top grossing animated film domestically. That was actually Monsters Incorporated, but I removed that in sequel in order to ensure consistent data. So, given the wide range of grosses I have to work with, I decided again to look at the median, or the number in the middle of the data set, as opposed to the average. Here I used agile or iterative approach to continue to rely on the median as opposed to the average, even in my visualizations. First, I ranked the films by gross, then I used a calculation in the chart to show the top 50% of films in blue and the bottom 50% in orange. And from this chart, I found that the median domestic gross for animated films is roughly about $153 million. Next, I created a chart grouping films by year. Here you can see a steady growth in gross year by year until 2020 when the pandemic hit. Since then, the box office has grown again, but obviously it's nowhere near its peak in 2016 when 9 animated films were released. From this chart, I looked at 2022 films and I averaged the 3 films' grosses. This is one of the few times that I used the average. From that, I got 129 million as the average gross of animated films released in 2022. Finally, to enrich my projections with even more recent data, I looked at 2023 films as well. I took the top 40 performing films of this year so far, again, given that Migration will be a major release, and looked at the median. I got The Flash with a domestic box office of $108 million. And given all 3 of these numbers, I again averaged the 3 to get a projection of $130 million. Given that the animated films median had more data behind them, 143 films, as opposed to the 2022 numbers, which only had 3 films, and the 2023 numbers, which only had 40 films, I weighted the animated movies median more and give my final projection as $130 million to $140 million. So, there you have it. Universal's animated film, Migration, will make anywhere from $130 million to $140 million domestically when it is released later this year. I had lots of fun with this project, not so much with the code in Python as it was difficult at times to wrangle with. I again found Python to be finicky at times, which is why I broke up the code that I did use to make sure that it went through without any errors. But I enjoyed learning everything that I could about SQL, and I'll almost certainly use it again in the future. Thank you to all the instructors, the TAs, and the staff at Savvy Coders. That's my capstone.